Chapter 16, Careers in Information Technology. You heard that right. The Chapter 16 takes us all the way back around to what we first visited back in Chapter 1. Right? We're looking at IT careers. This time, though, we're doing it from a slightly different perspective. Before, we were introducing what these careers were. We were even giving you the idea of, okay, there's such a thing as a database administrator or a system administrator or a network engineer. Well, now you've been exposed to this stuff. You've seen what a database looks like. You have an idea of what a DBA would do. You've been introduced to the fundamentals, and the very fundamentals, I might add, of networking and what a network engineer will deal with. So we're going back around, and we're going to look at it this time with a bit more of a discriminating eye. This time, we're going to be looking at it from the perspective of a job seeker, namely a freshly graduated major in SMCC's Information Technology or InfoSec program. Now, this slide is actually a little old. I mean, this thing is 8 years old as of this filming. We're talking about 2008 numbers, median 2008 salaries, estimating ahead for the next decade, which is only 2 short years away. But you kind of get the gist. You see what we're looking at here, especially this column about percentage increase in these various disciplines within IT. And now, admittedly, I haven't gone through and compared to what these numbers are using current sources, like from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. But I always hazard a guess that they're pretty close. Pretty much, with the exception of computer programmers here, we see a pretty steady growth in career opportunities for these different disciplines within IT. The salaries, well, they're a bit lower than what they would be. They're a bit higher now than what they would have been in these 2008 ranges. But these are kind of hard to read. These would be median salaries. So that's factoring in both the high-end salary and the low-end salary, let's say, for a database administrator. And I can tell you firsthand, it varies greatly based on the area of the country you're in. If you're a DBA out in, let's say, the Dayton, Ohio region, where there's a large Department of Defense presence and large DoD contractors like Lockheed Martin and Ball Aerospace and General Dynamics, that's the land of big data. And out there, DBA's salaries are well into the 6 figures. So it all depends. Overall, though, it's safe to say that career opportunities within IT are continuing to expand overall. This should be nothing new to us. We looked at some of these specialties before, right? We have network administration, system administration, web administration, so on, computer support specialists. We added IT management to this because that is a senior field within IT. And in many cases, your IT managers are drawn from experienced IT administrators. Also, we learned that these different specialties aren't necessarily set in stone. Depending on the organization, you can be the IT manager, you can be the web administrator, the system administrator, the network administrator, and the person that shovels the driveway when it snows outside. Up here in New England, not terribly uncommon. In really large organizations, though, these can be easily separate disciplines and even subdivided further than that. I've been in organizations that had IT managers that handled the server groups, and then other IT managers that handled the database groups, and so on. I used to be an IT manager for the storage group. So these can either be very broad fields and with a lot of overlap in small organizations, or they can be very specific roles, if you will, within large, highly segmented organizations. Now, these roles don't necessarily correspond directly into careers, or they might bring in careers that are what you could call on the fringe a bit, like computer forensics. With the Ohio Department of Public Safety, we had the Ohio State Patrol as one of our member agencies. Well, a member of the part of the Ohio State Patrol was the Computer Crimes Lab. And in there, you had IT people or IT qualified people doing forensics. doing criminal investigations based on recovering computer assets. Likewise, web development. Right? We've looked at it pretty much from the perspective of the person who manages the web server. Well, somebody has to sling HTML code. Somebody has to sling CSS. They have to understand PHP and do all that programming. You have graphic artists that make websites look pretty, who understand how to make colors come together. That's a related field. I mean, it's not really a development field per se, but it is part of the overall web development umbrella. Likewise, programmers, software engineers, there's lots of them out there, and they have all kinds of different roles. Everything from Visual Studio programmers up there using C# and Visual Basic and C++, all the way over to assembly programmers writing code for microwave ovens and refrigerators, dealing with actual assembly code, very low level language indeed. Information systems, that can include really all of it, the data aspect of it, the data analysis part of it, data warehousing. Companies like LexisNexis, even Google, right, falls under information systems in the larger sense of it. What about a computer technician? We're talking about someone that actually cracks a case open and fixes things. That used to be IT, and many people still think of that as being IT, but it's not really. We know that now. But there's still an ever reducing role of computer technicians, but they're still out there in some capacity. Although I do believe they will die out sooner rather than later in this day of portable devices and disposable computing assets. But that's still on the fringes of IT. And project management. Now, project management is the management of projects. This is having a person oversee the many phases of a project, defining the many phases of a project. Now, we tend to think of projects from our perspective as IT projects, and indeed many of them are. And many project managers work within the boundaries, if you will, of IT. Some of them even come from an IT background. Strictly speaking, though, project management is not. You can have projects in anything. You can have a project that involves, upgrading the air conditioning system in a factory. Well, those are the same project managers that would oversee a Active Directory upgrade in some IT infrastructure. The project management aspect of itself remains more or less the same. Still, it can be considered on the fringes of IT, and it's a career that an IT person could find themselves in at some point in time. We talked about this a little bit back in Chapter 1 also, from a very high level. IT ethics is a really big deal, especially from those of us that have privileged access to computing resources. Not just on ethical standpoints, but on legal standpoints. Protecting our jobs, keeping ourselves out of jail, following these basic IT ethics is important. And there's nothing that should be a surprise here, right? I mean, we shouldn't use our resources to harm people. We shouldn't be using that to post information about people that's going to be harmful to them. We shouldn't be going in and blowing away other people's work. As a system administrator, it's well within our power to do that. Does it make it ethical or proper? No, absolutely not. The exact opposite is the case. Snooping around in people's data, snooping around in their emails, that kind of thing. Getting into a computer and stealing, either using it to steal actual assets, I don't know, like Superman 3, going out there and stealing, the rounded off parts of a penny from a bank, or stealing intellectual property, like proprietary software, using proprietary software that we haven't paid for, pirating software. Believe it or not, a lot of IT professionals do that. They're opening themselves and their employers up to a great deal of liability for that. So they need to be mindful. Getting in on somebody's system or environment without their proper authorization, right? Under the guise of, hey, we're hacking you to see if you're secure or not. Well, that's fine if they're hiring you as a cybersecurity person to do a penetration test. It's not proper if you just pick somebody and hack them to see if you can get in. So we can't do anything without the permission to do so. Again, we can't steal other people's proprietary property, their intellectual property. And we've got to think about in terms of greater social consequences. One example of this, and I don't totally agree with it, was a guy a while back. I think he was in Southeast Asia. The guy that wrote Flappy Bird. Remember that was the app for our iPhones and Android devices, and that app went crazy popular, crazy quick. And this guy was making some serious money from the App Store. Well, he pulled his own app under the premise that he felt that he didn't want people neglecting their schoolwork and everything else, just playing with his game, so he pulled his game from the market. Well, that's an example of thinking about the social consequences of your product. It's a bit of a far-fetched one. I think personally I would have continued for the money, but that's just me. But there are social consequences to what we're doing. Look at it like social networking. What you post for information about people, or even yourself, that's got to have an impact later on. And really, it just comes down to, well, if you're going to use these resources, if you're going to use your elevated privileges as an IT professional, keep in mind other people and how it's being used is really what ethics comes down to. We can define ethics into a few major categories, right? And in terms of privacy, which is the protection of people's information, ownership, who owns their information, control, how accurate information is, how secure information is. I mean, these all are very broad aspects to the much greater subject of IT ethics. Just be aware that they're there. Now, some of the IT or some of the social considerations we need to think about are some are very obvious. Some are pretty obscure. Others, though, I mean, they're right here in front of us. We have this thing called a digital divide, where you have basically your upper income part of society with copious access to the internet and computing resources, and then your less privileged part of society without access to it. And as time goes on, as we become more dependent on that internet access, on those computing resources, the divide between those that have access to it and those that don't gets wider and wider and wider. An example of that is just recently here helping my 18-year-old file his federal tax return. You'd be surprised how hard it is to file a paper tax return anymore. The big push is for online access. Well, if he didn't have that online access, he could have still did it, but he would have been at a disadvantage. It would have been harder. Other things, how about computer-related health problems? How about carpal tunnel syndrome? Bad backs, eyesight, whatever. Maybe computer-related mental health problems. That kind of links down to internet addiction we see down there, a couple lines down. I know I've had people work for me who were so addicted to their games, usually online gaming, massively multiplayer stuff, things like EverQuest and that kind of thing, that they would spend all their waking hours while they weren't at work on their games, including not sleeping at night, their alarm going off, realizing, oh, I have to go into work, coming into work, looking like they just got run over, doing an 8 or 9 hour workday, immediately going home and doing it again. That's a health problem, and that's a social consideration that we need to consider. Maintaining privacy and safety, right? This is huge in social networking. Prime example, going on vacation and posting pictures all over Facebook or Instagram or whatever about, yep, here we are over on the cruise out in the Mediterranean, and okay, what's up with your house at home? Right? Anyone who's watching is going to know, okay, you are now on vacation. That's a safety issue. That means come over here and rob me. Likewise, privacy. It's amazing how much stuff people put online about their private lives. One of my customers once was a law firm, and they dealt with personal injury. Well, they were constantly suing people or being sued. Well, one of their computing resources, one of their infrastructure resources was a program that would go out and harvest information about their clients or about people their clients are suing from social networking. Going after people for claiming disability, and then it shows pictures of them skydiving that morning and that type of thing. Is we put a lot of information out there, and for someone who's looking, they can get a lot. They can learn a lot about us. A lot of it's unintentional or flotsam, if you will, and that's referred to as digital litter. And that's just stuff that's out there that by itself was one little piece of information that's kind of meaningless, but you take that information and piece it with another piece, then another piece, then another piece, and now you get a full picture into someone's private life, into their proprietary business stuff. I mean, it's definitely a big deal. We already talked about internet addiction. It doesn't take long to look at Facebook and check out those friends that we all have that seem like they post every 20 minutes. And, making dinner, eating dinner, doing our dishes, watching TV, getting ready for bed, hope I sleep well tonight, 2 o'clock in the morning, can't sleep tonight, and so on. There's something going on there, right? Then issues of censorship and obscenities or things that would be considered socially unacceptable. What defines those things? Who defines those things? Well, many of them haven't been defined yet. In some cases, they're subjects of conflict. Again, something else we need to be aware of. Now, many of the things we talked about, many of those social considerations, are fixable through technology solutions. Meaning, you get carpal tunnel by operating a certain type of mouse, then you come up with a new pointing device. And you see that sometimes with people who use trackballs. Maybe different kinds of chairs. Maybe something that controls your kids' access to the internet to help keep that internet addiction under control. Or something that does, cyber net nanny or something like that. Those are technical solutions. On the flip side, there's administrative solutions to some of these problems. And these are known as IT policies. Now, we don't generally see these at home, although you probably have them. Meaning, if you tell your kids you can only be online till 8:30 or 9 p.m. at night, that's an IT policy. Well, companies do the very same thing. And it's surprising how many companies don't have formal IT policies, because they really, really should. IT policies should be written out in a way that defines the role that IP plays in that organization. It tends to get lost sometimes through management, through other employees or other departments. Amazingly, many organizations don't treat the CIO as a true senior level executive. They almost treat him as an extension of the help desk. So IT does play a role, in some cases a major role. These IT policies also should define what the proper employee usage of those assets are. Right? Does that mean is from work, are they allowed to go shopping? Can they go on Amazon? Are they allowed on Facebook? Are they allowed to visit potentially offensive websites? Well, that's part of employee usage. Something has to define that. Employees' right to privacy. Do your employees have any right to privacy? I know if you work for the federal government or the Department of Defense, you have no right to privacy. There's a big login banner right when you log in every time that says, hey, anything you do in the system is subject to monitoring. And if you do something you're not supposed to do, it's subject to disciplinary action. Well, that gets a lot grayer in the private world, but it has to be defined somewhere, and this is where IT policies come in. What about the proper usage of data, the security and the privacy of it? Are you going to let your employees take their data home? Are you going to let them use it for their own private gain? Maybe take a list of your customers, and then they can use it to help drive their own little Amway business or whatever off to the side? Is there anything prohibiting them from doing that? Well, again, an IT policy that should be spelled out. What about the ownerships of ideas developed using those IT assets of a company? You work for a graphic arts studio, and on your workstation in your office with all the drawing programs and all that, you draw out a logo that you turn around and start selling to people, not through your company, but from you personally. Right? Do you have a right to do that? Well, maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe there's an IT policy that says, hey, anything that gets developed on these systems is owned by this organization. Again, that's something that's very common within the federal government. And what about copyright protection issues? Both how the company protects its own copyrights and how it respects the copyrights of others. Prime example, most commercial music out there is copywritten. And because of that, you just can't go and make that the background sound of your website. FYI, don't do this. Music on a website, incredibly annoying, totally Shea 90s, but annoyingly, some still do that. But if someone was prone to do that, there are copyright issues there. What about the company you're doing that for? Right? Who gets the liability behind that? So many things. These are policy issues. These are administrative issues. These are not necessarily technical. And that's the type of thing that you, as an IT manager, are going to have to decide on. Now, one part about a career in IT, probably as much as any other field, more than most, is our culture of continual learning. Technology changes quickly. We've seen this. We saw this when we did our history lessons. Both in operating systems and in hardware. If we stop, if we decide to say at some point along, I'm not learning anymore, my brain is full, I'm done, I'd say it's a safe bet that you as an IT person will be obsolete within 5 years, within 10 years, definitely. There's one way we stay current, and that's to continue learning. That means looking at new technology, certifying in new technology, because guess what? Our certifications are only as good as the versions that we certified for. Many of them nowadays, like the CompTIA certs, have a shelf life, 3 years. So do Cisco certs, and at the end of that 3 years, they expire, which means you're required to recertify. Well, guess what? It's not the same test you're taking when you recertify. The tests are updated to include newer technologies. So you have to study that. You have to stay on top of it. Also, not just technology, but business requirements. It's bad enough we have to keep up on the latest technology trends, but we have to keep up on the latest business trends within our fields. Because ultimately, no matter what, information technology is a business function. We're all about driving business decisions and driving business policies or processes. And that, as we say in show business, is a wrap. That ends our final lecture of this course. So this now segues into our course project, which there is a video for. So I will see you over in the week 14 course project.